All right, good morning, everyone. How are we all doing today? Yeah, I see people are still joining in. Any questions or comments so far about servers, why we need it, and why it's better than mock API or other tools like that? For this lecture, we will be taking a look at Express.js in more detail, and we are also going to see how to create endpoints. Depending on how much time we have, we'll try to go as deep as possible, or else the rest will be covered in the next lecture. All right. Okay, let's wait for a couple more minutes for more people to join. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, do ask. Yes, hello, Zabeda. Okay, so let's slowly begin. Hopefully, more people will join later on. Share my screen. I believe my screen is visible for everyone. Perfect. Okay. So today's lecture will be more focused on Express.js, which is essentially going to be our Express server that we're going to use right now. So what is Express.js? Now, Express.js, commonly known as Express, is a minimal and flexible web application framework for Node.js. It is designed to make the process of building web applications and APIs in Node.js easier, more straightforward. Express.js provides a set of features for web applications and mobile application development and follows model view controller architectural pattern. That's a very bookish description of what it does. Essentially, like it says over here, it's basically a framework that makes development easier in Node.js. Moving forward, what are some of the key features of Express? So we have routing, we have middleware, we have template engines, we have static file serving, HTTP methods, middleware, and routing. So these are some of the key features. We are going to look into the description. Probably we won't be able to see the examples for each and every one of them today, but we'll see them slowly throughout the week. So routing. What's routing? Express allows you to define routes that respond to HTTP requests. Routes define the endpoints of your application and how they behave. Remember, yesterday we were talking about creating our own endpoints. This is something that will make our lives much, much easier by doing that. So we set routes for each and every single endpoints, and that kind of describes how the whole application will behave. Now, moving forward, middleware. Express middleware functions are functions that have access to the request and response objects. They can perform various tasks such as modifying the request or response, terminating the request or response cycle, and calling the next middleware in the stack. So this is something that's very important. We will have a whole lecture on middleware, but the idea is over here, you're able to modify all these requests and responses with the server. Remember, we were talking about how mock API doesn't really allow us to make changes when it's actually working through the process. So this is something that middleware is something that will help us with that. So that's where this is different from tools like mock API. All right, so you can see here is an image. We send in a request, goes through the Express app. Middleware kind of works as an environment or works in the environment to make sure necessary modifications are made, and it sends out a response from the application. Any questions so far? Anyone? So moving forward to template engines. What are these? Now, while Express itself does not include a template engine, it allows you to integrate with various template engines like EJS, Handlebars, or Pug to dynamically generate HTML. So what happens is server and template, both of these go through the template engine, right? It's another way of modifying the HTML file from a different file. So you can actually push in changes from your JavaScript file into the HTML file without having to write anything extra in the HTML. So, okay, I believe, was that understandable, or questions about this on how template engines work? I actually have a question in the chat. Main says, is mock API as a middle? Mock API doesn't really work with middleware like that, but the servers, the databases that we will make will be helping out with middleware. But yeah, so essentially that's what template engines do. They push changes into the website from different files itself, from essentially the server file, actually. So what are templates over here? So for template, you could call the website as a template in general. So a good example for this would be, in general, the website itself is treated as the template over here. In a very simple term, we could call it as it works the same as JSX sort of, but in JSX you're coding HTML inside the JavaScript file, but over here you're actually sending in values like text into the HTML file. So that's the basic difference between EJS and JSX. I guess when you see an example, it's going to be much clearer. Okay, so static file serving. Express can serve static files, for example, HTML, CSS, images directly, making it easy to include client-side assets to your application. So static files like HTML, CSS, and then the images as well, you can directly include them into your application from your server side, which makes client side assets accessible much more. In general, it just makes accessing any sort of file that either is in your server side or client side much more easier and much more accessible. HTTP methods. Now, Express supports standard HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete, etc., making it suitable for building RESTful APIs. Like we've discussed, we'll be making our custom APIs using this. So it does the same thing, get, post, put, delete, whatever you need, and integrates that to the server. Middleware and routing. So middleware functions are executed in the order they're declared, and routing allow that. But how does it actually work? Let's see. So here's an image. So what happens is you send in a request. The first part would be it parses the body. Once that part's done, the middleware sends it to the next part of the process, which is authentication. And after that's done, it gets sent to the router to be sent to whichever endpoint is required. Now, this could be an example for maybe a website with a simple login system. You send in a request, the body is parsed, then authentication is done, and then the router redirects you to the endpoint that you were looking for. In this case, it could be, say, a dashboard or something. So that's something that is very important over here. Any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you can ask as many questions as you want. I'll try to answer them. Still don't get it. Which part? This image over here that I have on the screen? Okay. So usually when you use mock API, how do requests work? Request and response. Help me out with the answer for this. When you're using mock API, how does the request and response work over there? You send a GET request, and then you get a response where you get everything that's inside the API that's stored. Exactly, data is sent from the server. But now say you're creating a login system, right? You have to do the authentication as well. Can you do the authentication in mock API or the endpoint of mock API? No, right? You have to get the data. You have to do it separately in your code, which will be extra work. You have to make those necessary connections to create that kind of authentication. And in general, it just makes your code bigger. And it takes time as well because you first retrieve the data and then you make necessary modifications. But what this will do, you send in a request. It goes step by step. So the first thing it will do, it's gonna assess the body of the request, as in what you're sending in as a request. In this case, it's login, right? We send in what? We send in our login info. In other words, we send in the username and password. Okay, so that gets sent as a request. Now, usually in mock API, we retrieve it and do the authentication afterwards. But in this case, after the request is parsed or the body of the request is parsed, we understand what it wants. We go to the next step where we are doing the authentication. So we are essentially doing the authentication even before we are sending a response. So once the authentication is done, it's a pass or it's a fail. It goes to the next step, which is the router, and the router will send you back response based on the authentication result. If it's a success, it gets sent to maybe a dashboard. If it's fail, it shows fail in your website. So middleware, as you can see from here, the middleware stack, this is the whole process of what's going on in the middle of a response, in the middle of a request and a response. So whatever is happening in the middle of a request and a response cycle is essentially middleware, a very vague way of saying. If you want in a much more detailed way, you will be getting a whole lecture on middleware. So don't worry about that, but just make sure you understand the basics of what I'm saying over here on how it's actually working. Details are going to be discussed in one of the lectures. I'm not sure if tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So authentication is not needed each time, right? No. So for that, you need sessions. Now, if your session is complete, then you would have to send a request for authentication again, right? It's the same as any social media app or any kind of website that requires login. You'll see after you're logged in for a while, it logs you out. I think Canvas does that. So the session is complete. So the next time you try to get in, it's going to send in another authentication request. So it all depends on how you set up the authentication. Now, for most apps, I believe for applications like Facebook, Instagram, or any social media app in general, they don't really log you out once the session is done. They kind of store your information in cache and work with that until you actually delete everything. But yeah, other than that, if it's a basic login request, this is somewhat what it looks like. You send in a request, the authentication is done in the middle throughout the process before the response is sent back. And the response is actually the final response that you're looking for, not something that you'll have to work on again. Does that make sense? Any other questions? And the router is actually taking you to the endpoints. So for example, I want to go to the ID that's maybe 3 or 4. So once I go to that endpoint, um, the router is what's kind of setting the path, you could say. So say the person logging in has a ID of, well, usually for these websites, the IDs are very, I don't know, they're very big, and you don't really have to worry about that usually. But you'll see on any kind of link where you require a login, once you're logged in, there's gonna be an ID on the side over there on the dashboard, on the link, sorry, on the URL. So the middleware is between a client and a server. Yes, exactly. Middleware is what's happening in between a client's request and the response. So far, we have been using mock API without middleware. Yes, because with mock API, what we have done is we get the information and do whatever we have to do afterwards, right? But that takes time because you are getting the information or the data from the server, and then you're making the modifications that are required. So that will take a little more time than this. This, on the other hand, is doing all the authentication or whatever you need to do while the request is being processed. And that saves a lot of our time. Middleware stack locally on our computer. Um, it doesn't really, so this is more like a visualization. You, it it's not really a stack locally. It's more like you creating sort of function, you could say, sort of functions that kind of modify the data that you're getting from the server. It is local, it does exist locally, but it exists as a functionality itself. Middleware is more like a process, you could call that. It doesn't really stack up in the way we think of stacks, like this over this over this. It more works as a process in between requests. What is the function of middleware when data is moving from server to client? Okay, so data is moving from server to client. So in a situation where you make a request to just get the data, I assume that's what you're asking, right? All right. So in a situation where you're just getting the data, likely the request is first, is the same way, request is gonna get parsed. Then based on the request, in this case, it's just getting information from the server, is going to get information from the server and send it to the endpoint that you mentioned. Does that make sense? Samina, does that make sense or should I repeat it? It doesn't really happen in reverse. So the authentication part, it kind of gets taken over by data fetching, if that makes sense. So yeah, the request is assessed when it's being parsed, and then based on the request, the server, in this case, the request is a GET, so the server will be just sending in information to your website. So the request will usually also mention a endpoint where you want to send the server data, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to route it to that particular endpoint. Hope that makes sense. The get part we'll actually see in a bit, because I'm going to code in front of you to show like a live demo on how to create the endpoints. So you'll see that over there. But this is essentially the very basics of what's happening behind our eyes. So we're not really seeing what's happening, but it is happening on the back in the background. Any questions so far? Anyone? So far, so good. It's great to hear. Is that everybody? If everyone could answer, that would be great. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'll explain again. No problem. But yeah, if you have no questions, do let me know as well. Chat. Okay. So amazing. So let's see all that in action. So let's do one thing. Let's go on a 10-minute break. We come back and we're gonna see how to code all these endpoints. Yes, sure. So I didn't get the question for this answer. Oh, so my answer for the question was, so I'll repeat the question. The question was, so far we have been using mock API without middleware. Yes, mock API doesn't really have middleware like that, because for mock API, how does it work usually? You get the data from the server and then you are making changes that are necessary or whatever you want to do with the data. But middleware kind of allows you to make necessary modifications while the request is being processed. Hope that answers your question, Ezra. Okay, so yeah, let's go on a 10-minute break and we will come back and see how to make the endpoints. No, mock API is not really doing middleware. It's just essentially, it's very simple. It just does one thing. It retrieves information and posts information. That's it. Middleware is important when we are making modifications to it. So mock API itself doesn't really handle middleware like that. It's us who kind of do the modifications for it. All right. So yeah, let's go on. Yeah, let's go on a 10-minute break and I will see you guys in 10 minutes with the code.
All right, we are back. Now let's take a look at our code. Let me share VS Code. I believe my screen is visible. All right, so let me create a new folder. Today is what? Jan 09. Create, open. Okay. So starting from a fresh file over here, what are the first things that you guys think we would need? Anyone? JS files, our package.json. In general, let's do one thing. Let's just do an npm init -y. This should create our package. That's amazing. Okay. We are going to get to the JSON files soon, but other than that, what else do we need? We need to initiate our Express server, right? So for that, I am gonna write down npm I express. So as you can see, it added our Express server over here as a dependency. Now, what's the next thing that we would need? Now, one thing that we've already discussed before in previous lectures is that for servers, whenever there's a change, you would have to restart the server. So every time that happens, doing that again and again manually is very tiresome. For that, we use nodemon. We will have to install nodemon as well. So let's do a npm I dash dash. I'm installing it as a developer dependency. So I'm gonna write it down as dash dash save dev and nodemon. If you want the documentation for nodemon, I can actually provide you that in the chat. Just give me a second. So this website over here should have the documentation for nodemon. Or actually not on the wrong website. Oh no, this one. Okay. So you can check this out. This should show you the installation processes as well. Okay, so for nodemon, let's install that. Saved. Okay, nodemon is there. Now we will have to create a script over here for nodemon. Let's call it dev start. All right. And inside this, I'm gonna write nodemon, and then the file, the server file, in other words, the server.js, which I haven't made yet. I will have to make it now. Let me see the chat. Save dev. Yeah, it's one word, no space. I believe so. Let me just check it again. Yeah, there's no space in between. It's just one word. Dash dash save dash dev. You can, if you have questions about how it works as well, like there's a small definition in the link I've sent. You could check that out as well. Or in your cases, when you're making it, you could just copy and paste it from the website. That works too. Okay, so I will have to create a file over here, server.js, right? So nodemon space server.js. So every time I do dev start, it's gonna restart the server file. So let me do npm start. Hmm. Interesting. Okay, don't think it works. npm. Oh, right. We have to do npm dev start. npm run dev start. Okay, this should be running in my server 3000, localhost 3000. Okay, that's interesting.
This name, so the dev start was one word?
Yes, dev start was one word, yes. Console.log. Let's try this. Console.log h. You see, whenever I made a change, it kind of started showing the change over here and it reran the whole server. So it automatically does the work for you. So, okay, all that's done. The reason behind this being like this is because we haven't really started our server as of yet. So for that, what we would need to create a variable for our server. Remember how we used to do it, writing const, then it's the same process. So const, then let's call this express. I missed a letter over here. Okay, express is equal to require, and inside that quotation express. Okay. So over here, we are just creating a variable for our server, but now we have to actually create an app that has the server. So I'm gonna write down const app is equal to express. So this is right now creating our server. And once our server is created, we have to mention which port it has to run on. So right now I want it to run on this port, localhost 3000. So I will just write app.listen and I will call this 3000. See if this works. Okay. So it says cannot get. Cannot get what? Cannot get slash. What does this mean? Anyone? Any idea? So right now, since this came up, it means that the connection is complete. But what does this mean? Cannot get slash. Anyone, any idea? No data. Okay, close. But what, I need something more exact. What do you understand from what it says? The answer is in the sentence itself. Directory, correct. Exactly. So right now it is in the root directory, right? So there's nothing in the root directory. That's why it's showing this. But what if I make some changes over there and create something in our server.js? So let me write down app.get app.get. Okay, so one thing about app.get is it requires two parameters. On the left side, we will have our directory. In other words, right now I could just write down a slash, but over here we would require three variables: res, actually request, req, response, and next. So in most cases, we don't usually need next. Not most cases, at least the cases where we are just getting information. So right now, at least for learning purposes, request and response is good enough. Everyone clear so far? Any questions? If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. Why listen 3000? So this right here is the port. If I was trying to open up the localhost 5000, I would have put 5000 over here. So whichever port you want to go to, you write it down over here. Localhost 3000, it is very widely used, but there are others as well, like 3001, and then I believe yesterday for Vite we had 5173. So it varies actually. Anyways, so we have this where we write down app.get. So yeah, exactly. So it depends. Well, right now we're using 3000, so that really doesn't matter which port you're using. We'll talk about that later. But for now, let's try to get the basics of how to use our server. Okay, so I have the two parameters over here, the root and the route, and the two variables over here, request and response. So once that's done, let me create an arrow function that will essentially hold what we are doing. Okay, so inside this, there's something that you guys should know, that using something like res.send, you could actually just display something on the screen directly. You don't really have to do a console.log separately. A console.log will definitely show you that this is actually running. But other than that, in order to print something over there, you do this. Let's say I write res.send hi. Let's go back to the website. See, now it displays hi. So this could be anything. I could even have a JSON file over here, or maybe like an array of objects. Let's actually create one. Let's say I'm gonna make notes, okay? So I'll write down, say, const. Actually, I want this to change, so I'm just gonna write let notes is equal to. Inside this, I'm gonna write ID as 1 and content as, let's say, HTML is easy. Let's create another one. Same thing. ID to content is gonna be JavaScript is useful. Okay, so I could have this as well, and I could just write down, say, .json. And inside this, I could write down notes. And I should be getting a response over here. It essentially just shows the array of objects. But what if we have an error and we want to send the status? What if that happens? So let's change this then. Let's change this to send status. Let's say I have an error 500. What does it show? Internal server error. If I have error 400, bad request. So all these status codes are kind of pre-built, you could say. You just have to type in the right error code and it's gonna show it on the screen. Does that make sense? Anyone? Any question? What if we want to send a custom message? How about that? Let's try that. So I'm gonna do send for error 404. Let's send no, pick the wrong one. Status. So status 404. Let's send. You can't code. Let's see if that works. So yeah, you could even send custom messages to the server, to the browser based on the status code of the error. Clear so far? Questions? Anyone? Perfect. Is that for everyone? All right. Assume the silence is yes. Okay, let's proceed. So right now, we are doing everything in the root directory. So, okay, Esra asks, why, when I try to enter the same, only 17, I got not found. Same line as 17. Are you sure it's the exact same? Rest.status.send. I mean, we can check it out later, but if it has to be exactly like this. So the status showing which error you have, and send using the message. Send will send the message to the browser. So rest.send state. Okay, so rest.status only, not rest.send status. So you're just mentioning the status. Oh, I think I should show you this. So you see over here, it's still showing not found. So when you go to inspect, it says which kind of error it is, but in the browser, you can show whichever message you like. Let's try to change this to maybe 500. Okay, so yeah, see, internal server error, but over here, you see you can't code. Clear? And everyone? Okay, perfect. All right, so that's good. Now, let's go to the next part where we're actually creating the endpoints. So right now we are working from the root directory, correct? But what if I do something similar, but I create a different endpoint? Say I write down, let's say API. Nothing over here. API. Okay, so let me change this to just the message. API endpoint. There you go. So I can actually create the endpoint from over here, and I can do whatever I want inside this function block. Does that make sense, everyone? Clear? Questions about the endpoint? Okay. Samina says npm init npm I express. Okay, good. All right. So yeah, over here we have the endpoint that says API. But right now, we are only using get. We have other HTTP methods as well, right? So let's try a post as well. So for post, what can I do? One second. Okay. So for a post, I'm gonna do the same thing. Let's just paste this over here. But one thing that I'm gonna do different over here is I will be writing this down as post instead of get. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Let's call this API slash note. Okay, that's good. So for API notes, I'm gonna do a post. And inside post, let me create a variable. Okay, just one second. So, okay, const note, and what's the next thing that I can put? It's equal to, and this. So let me call this as ID 3. Let me just put in this over here. Okay, and I'm gonna put in content. Nope, not that. Content as hello. Okay. Now, after this is done, I will send a response to the server. Actually, from the server to the browser. Okay, so response.json is note over here. But when we actually go to the browser and write down this /notes, nothing actually appears here. Why? This is actually a request. So we won't be able to see it over here. For that, if you remember yesterday, we introduced REST client. For that, I need a file that ends with the extension .rest. So let me write down check.rest. Okay. So right now what I'm using is a post, and I have to write down the link and see. Let me send a request. See? Once I send the request, it shows me what I am posting, but it doesn't really show anything over here. Does that make sense why it's not posting anything on the browser, but I can see it from the REST client? So usually when you post something, okay, just post something. Do you get to see it on your website? No, right? How do you check that whatever you've posted is actually registered? You either go to the database itself, go to the server, or you check it from Postman. You can check it from Postman as well, right? So Postman actually shows you the whole request thingy. But right now, we don't want to go back to Postman again, since we can do it from VS Code itself. We don't have to go back and forth between Postman and VS Code. For that, we use REST client. I believe it was shown yesterday, but I'll show again. It's this extension over here, REST client. This is the one. So install this. After you're done installing, how to use it is exactly as shown on the screen. You create a folder that ends with the extension .rest. And over here, whatever method you want to use, post, if you even want to use get, you could do that as well. Let's say I'm going to use get, command V. Let's get rid of this. And I will get rid of that as well. Okay, no, that's wrong. See, it appears over here. So the only thing about get is once you get something from the server, you always show it on the browser as well. But for post, you don't really directly show it on the browser unless you get it back again. Clear so far? Anyone? Any questions? What kind of output? Like how or like the response itself? So this response, how to open the response window. Okay, I'll show it again actually. So it's pretty simple. So we have this. Let's just copy the link so that I don't lose it. Okay. So right now it's a blank check.rest file, right? I will write down post and I will paste the link as well, and I will send a request. It will automatically come up, this response tab. Was this what you were asking? So Hannah says it's giving me connection rejected. So few things to make sure over here. You have the link correct, the port number is correct. You have the method over here written down correctly. Make sure the extension is installed. And other than that, another reason could be there could be an error in whatever you've written down over here, either one of those. But I can check it out later during the lab. Okay, so that's for post. We can see the request over here. That's amazing. And so Hannah got it as in like you solved the issue, or is there still a problem with that? Okay, I'll take a look at it during the lab. Alrighty then. So we've seen post, we've seen get, but so far for get, we've only seen how we're sending information into the browser, how we're sending status into the browser. What we have not seen is getting the information by its ID. So what if I just want to write down HTML is easy? I will essentially just copy this. I'm gonna change the API link a bit. Notes slash. And what do you think I will write over here after the slash? Anyone? ID. But we can't just write ID, we have to do a colon, then ID. Okay, so let's see. If I do that, I wanna show the response as well. Okay. Oh, rest.json. Hmm. Okay, so there is some extra stuff that I need to do over here in order to make sure that I only get the ID that I'm looking for. But before that, let me just try something. Notes. Okay. All right, let me just try this as 1. Okay. As you can see, when I put in 1, it's still showing me what? The whole array of objects. But I only want it to show me one of it. So that we have to mention over here. We have to kind of code it out. So for that, let's write down a function that says, let me first get the ID. Const ID is equal to, so let's say number request dot parents dot ID. Okay, this way I should be getting the ID, and let me use it somewhere else now. So const note is equal to notes dot find note, then an arrow function, note dot ID is equal to ID. This should hold in the node I want to show. And then I'm just going to change this to note. Okay, let's see if this works now. Can't access note before initialization. Okay, let's check it out. What seems to be the error over here? Let me check. Still the same, right? That is interesting. Everything seems to be fine over here. Request dot params dot ID. Note seems to be the issue. Oh, that's why. Okay, let's try it again. Okay. So yeah, I missed an S over there. But yeah, now it should work. So based on this, if I change this to 2, I should be getting the next one, which is JavaScript is useful. Does that make sense? So Esther asks, why did you write /notes over here? You mean in this line? Oh, I just created the endpoint. So after notes, so I'm getting into the API, I'm getting into notes. I'm then looking for my ID. Honestly, this could be anything. This could be CIC for what it matters. And I just changed this to CIC. Ooh. CIC, okay. There you go. So it's however you want to design it. So Hannah asks, why convert it to a number? This I did instinctively, honestly, because it necessarily, honestly, it could just be a string as well, and you could match it like that. Doesn't really matter. But okay, I did it as a number because I didn't mention this as a string over here. So if I did this as a string, if I saved this as a string, this would ideally have to be a string as well. So this will return a string, but I'm changing it to number because this was in a number. Change this back. So Esra asks, so there is 2 endpoints at the same request. So essentially, since you're customizing the endpoint, you're basically just sort of just creating the path for the website or the browser. You're creating a route. So in this case, yes, you could say this whole thing over here is an endpoint. Not just one endpoint, two endpoint. This whole thing over here is an endpoint, you could say. Does that make sense, Esra? No, there's no restrictions like that, but it's always good to have it detailed like this. For example, since this was inside API and in notes, I prefer writing it down like this. That way it's more labeled and easier to understand. Let me change this then actually. No, API. API/notes. Okay, this should work. All right, so that's about it. Any questions, guys? Can I scroll up? Also in the chat, I see us asking, why are you converting to number if you can write the ID in the beginning as a number? Like ID 3. So I'm not really converting that into a number. So this right here, this is a string. And over here, it's kind of getting whatever's in this request link. So whatever I'm getting from the request, it is a string. That's why I'm converting into a number so that they can match. Does that make sense? Also, Samina, which part did you want to see? Line 20 onwards. This part? Okay. But yeah, that's about it. Any questions, anyone? Yeah, for sure, I can do that. Before I send that, let's try to see another thing over here. Let's see if we can have a delete request. So let's try, let's just copy this actually. Copy, Command V, let's change this to delete. Right now, it's not gonna make much sense, but it's just to show you guys how the REST client thingy is working. So I do that, I do that. So delete is complete. I don't have to print anything. Can get rid of this. Okay. So let me write del over here. I'll copy this. Essentially, it just displays whatever is there. Hmm. Here's no proper ID, so this won't work. This just might though. There seems to be an error. Oh, that's why, because this is still post. Delete. Why so? Oh, that's why, okay. Still can't delete? Wow, okay. Interesting. Let's see what's wrong over here. What's the mistake? Let's see. Okay, so I have const ID. Well, I think I should send the response status. Response. No. Need to send response dot status 204. Let's try it. Okay, let's try this quest. This is very odd. Everything seems fine. Let's try to get something over here. I will just, let me check my server file. Okay, just this should be good enough. No, it's this. Hmm. There you go. So let me check the delete one now. Works. So I'll change this to /del. It should work. Let's see. Delete. Send request. Okay, I think it's better we show this with an example. It's gonna be better. You have an array. Yeah, we have this array of objects over here, right? Yeah, that's about it. I wonder what's up with the delete thingy. I think the example's wrong altogether. Right. Okay. So the whole thing is, once it's getting deleted, it's supposed to show something, but it didn't. That's because we did not get rid of the node itself from there. So what if I just try to sort of just view, yeah, filter. That could work. Let's see. Let's try this filter. And let me, okay, ID, never mind. And let me write down filter, then find filter. What do you mean? Could you elaborate?
I mean, like you should find the node, then you're gonna filter all the nodes except of that node, right?
Right. I see what you mean, yeah. So, okay, let's do that. Let's actually first find it. We had it like that. Let's try to get this out on display. Rest dot, this was JSON, right? JSON, and let's do note. Okay. I will check rest over here. Okay, it just shows the one. If I change this to 2, it shows 2. Okay. Alrighty. Where is that? Okay. So now I have to filter this out from the main nodes. So what do you guys think? What will be the syntax for that? Or what should we write in order to filter it out? So we have found the node that we wanna take off. How do we filter it out? Anyone? Okay. So node equal to node ID not equal to note. Okay. So let's try that actually. Let's create a new line, and I will create a new variable as well. Const note 1 is equal to notes dot filter. Okay. So is this what you guys mean in the chat? Note dot ID exclamation equal to what was it? Note. Was it something like this? But should we pass del in the path? You mean this? Yes, so the reason behind doing this is I want to separate the endpoint for delete. So if I want to delete something, I'd go there. Okay, but in other words, for this, was this what you guys were suggesting? All right. So let's do this. Let's try node 1. Okay. Let's see what it shows. Actually, I can see it here. All right. So if you see, it's not really filtering it out. It's showing the whole thing. If I am not wrong, let's try this.
Try to change the name, a variable name, because you name it note and you use note also in the code.
Oh, for the variable name, I believe I call this node 1, right?
The other one, the note, the ID itself,
Oh,
like,
this?
no, the second line. This one, yeah, name it because you wanna,
Okay, see what you mean.
yes,
Node
and name it
ID.
there. Also in the filter, change it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, not equal, not ID.
Okay, so not ID. Like this?
Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Send request. It's essentially showing the same thing. Okay, let's see this now. Yep, it's essentially just showing you the whole website itself. Let me try this. /del, no, localhost /API/notes /del/1. Okay, doesn't really affect the website. But one thing is that the connection is set, that's for sure, because we are getting responses from it. Just ID try. Okay. You mean the same thing over here?
Yes, that's just the ID, not ID, just ID. Yes, exactly.
Okay, let's see. Oh, there you go. That's what was happening. Okay, that was one. There's two. Yeah, it works now. Amazing. But what was the issue over here then? Before with node ID?
I
Hmm.
think find its return the whole note, not just the ID before the constant,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I'm thinking as well. Because node ID, it's supposed to show me. Oh, okay, right. So it's essentially showing the whole object, not just the ID. We could have gotten that if we just took the ID from the object itself, but that's fine. This also works. All right, so delete is also working. So what we've seen today is we've seen the basic ones. We've seen how to create endpoints. We have seen how to get. With get, we've seen how to send information directly to the browser. We've also seen how to retrieve information from storage. In this case, it was this array of objects and display it on the screen. We have also seen how to display it by ID. We have seen how to post it. We've seen how the post connection works on the response of a REST client. We've also seen how to delete. These were the very basics of the server part. This does go a little bit more advanced. We'll check that out later. But any questions about the basics? Can I show delete for sure over here? So essentially, I think we just need this. We don't need that. Any other questions? Was the concepts for today clear? Can you put back the line you deleted? For sure.
Sorry, Tasneem, I don't get where you're getting the note.id.
Oh, okay. So whenever it's inside one of the nodes, you know how the functions work, like map, find, filter. So they go into the array of objects, and for each object, they take in their objects, what do you call those?
Oh, okay,
Attributes.
okay, 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 okay. So this is a variable for finding
Exactly. So
the note.
essentially this.
Okay, 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 okay. So for every note which is in notes, it's comparing the ID of that note with the ID.
Yes, you're
And
correct.
it is and it has okay. But we don't need this line, that's what you're saying. We don't need the find line.
No, we don't need this actually because we just used ID. That works just fine.
Okay, so filter is doing the same thing basically, kind of, and in the opposite. So it's filtering out the one which is not which is not equal to the ID.
So
Okay.
yeah, in general, like uh,
But then,
filter will just take away the one that you have come into. But what I was trying to do is I was trying to get the opposite one. So if I searched up one, it now shows me ID number 2. But if I show ID number 2, I only want ID number 2, right? So that's what I was trying to show over here.
okay, so
But
filter is actually taking it out,
yeah,
taking that
it's
value
taking
out,
it out. Exactly. It's taking it out and just showing you
the rest
the,
of the
yeah,
other.
exactly. It's not necessarily deleting anything right now because it's not really a database of sort. It's
Yeah.
just a variable. But I guess a proper example would be when we are setting up databases later on, you'll see how it actually deletes from the database itself.
So it will then sync with note one.
Yes, you're correct.
Thank you.
I have one question, Tasneem. If
Yes.
if I write response to JSON, not one, the note that I'm find it, it's gonna like show me on the response file the note that I deleted. This is what's gonna happen.
I think so, yeah. Let's try it. Why not?
Okay.
Let's send request. Yeah. So it essentially shows the one that you searched.
Okay, so
So
I return in this response, I return the note that I wanna see it.
yeah. So in this one, so essentially, in short, what's happening is if you just use find and display whatever you're finding, it works as like a search option.
Okay, okay.
But if I am using note 1 over here, what this does, it deletes the one that you're essentially searching. In this case, you're searching 1, so it's deleting 1 and showing you the opposite one,
I'm
which
gonna
is
show me all
ID2.
the rest. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Does that make sense for everyone? Any questions? Good so far, amazing. Is that for everybody? Amazing. Can you send server.js here? Yes, I can. If this is the server.js. Yeah, it should be available for you guys over there. But yeah, to sum up, I'll give you a short recap. The first thing that we need to do is set up our server. For that, let's go back to the package.json. We needed to install three things. First, we had to do a npm init y. Let me just write it down, actually. That's easier. Text. Okay, so the first one was it npm? Yeah. npm init y. This was the first one. The second one, exactly, Samina wrote it down over there in the chat. The second one was npm I express. What this does, it kind of just initializes the Express server itself. And then in the next line, we have npm. And next we are initializing nodemon. So --save -dev. This is because I was saving it as a developer dependency. And next we have space nodemon. So these are the three things that we need to initialize at the very beginning from the terminal. And you can see over here, nodemon comes up over here, Express server comes up over here, and then we create a script for it called dev start. You could call this whatever you like. I call this dev start, and I call nodemon, which essentially picks the server, which will be rerunning or restarting every time there's a change. And once that's done, you just write down npm run dev start. In my case, it's dev start, but for you, it could be whatever you name it, okay? Next, you do this, and you should be able to see your server on your browser or whatever you wanna show over there. Then we move forward to server.js. The first thing that we do is we create a variable for the Express server. Next, we go on to create an application that actually has the server. Afterwards, I create a port, or I assign a port for the app in which it will display everything. Moving on, we created an array of objects, which we will be using later on. But at first, we tested the root directory with just sending a small message or maybe a status. We've seen how we can send status and also send a customized message with it. We have seen how to post something new, a new object into the array or a new object into your browser. We have seen how to get based on the ID of the objects, and we have seen how to delete. So that kind of sums up the lecture for now. If you guys have any questions, please write it down in the chat. I can see Ezra asks a question. When we send a delete request for an ID, does it delete from the code in the server that we already wrote, or is it going to delete it from another place? So once we delete something, it gets deleted from the database. Right now, the data is not getting deleted because it's inside a variable. If we want, we could do that, but we have to kind of design it like that, where we are getting rid of the ID that's being selected. You have to kind of design it like that in the delete part. Does that make sense, Asra? Okay, so I have a few more questions. Gafran asks, can you repeat the def start part? Yeah, for sure. Another question is npm why meaning. So let's start with the dev start part. So one thing that we've mentioned before is when you are making changes in your server, you have to restart it again and again. Now, doing that is very time consuming. For that, we use nodemon. What nodemon does, it kind of just restarts the server every time there's a change. And in order to initialize that, I used it like this. I initialized save dev nodemon because I saved it as a developer dependency, as you can see over here. And for the dev start part, I just created a script mentioning which server nodemon will be working with, or which file nodemon will be working with, which is server.js. Does that make sense? All right. Okay, Samain, I see your question. I am getting to that. So why do we use -y? Honestly, I haven't even thought about it like that, but I'm pretty sure there's an explanation. Let me just look into it. So npm init y. Oh, I think it simply means yes or something like that. Okay, so usually from what I can see, there are some other initializations that need to take place, and over there you have to give some additional authorizations. So this npm init -y kind of does it all for you in one go, from what I understand in this link. Okay. This is lecture 113. Yes, you're correct. Well, yeah, that's about it. So do you guys have any other questions about the lecture? All right, then let's finish it off over here. We can go on our break and I will see you guys in 10 minutes.